Welcome, ladies and mentligents, to another wonderful narration. I'm your host. Here's a kiss in case you don't finish the video.
Mwah.
Today's story comes from /HFY wordsmith, Regal Legal Eagle. Please show your love to the author. Links are below in the description. Haha. Dicks. Well, I'm up to chapter 10, and the capital is nowhere in sight. Interesting how my original single chapter has grown. Chapter Dicks. Special Agent Muller presented his ID to Sergeant Tavish of the Galactic Police. The Greslin looked it over, scanning it in his computer before handing it back. Being aquatic creatures, the Greslin had to wear exosuits to survive the standard atmospheric conditions that were standard across the galaxy. Plus, their culture had a very strong sense of moral codes and justice. This made them natural cops, since their exosuits could simply be upgraded for police work, and they already had a good ethical standing. Even so, Muller didn't like them very much. They were too strict in their codes, and often followed the law by rote instead of by intention. Even so, they were well-meaning, so he figured there could be worse cops out there. "You'll have to excuse me if I ask a lot of questions, Agent Muller," came his robotic voice from the suit. "It's not a very usual case around here to get mixed up in interspecies affairs." Muller took his ID back and tucked it into the breast pocket of his black suit. "That's all right. Since I represent the unified human government, which isn't a member nation of the galactic government, yet I'm well versed in explaining such things." Sergeant Tavish's exosuit broadcast a sign intending for non-verbal understanding, then spoke up. "But you are allowed limited access to our police network, it seems." "Yes, but only in regards to capturing wayward humans the galactic government wants us to bring to justice. It's understood that non-human justice for a human, especially an American, would lead to a war between our species and many others. So the easiest thing to do is get one of our own to bring them in." The sergeant sent out another of those non-verbal signals. "I don't understand how you got here so fast, however. I only sent out the station broadcast a few sleep cycles ago." "Yes, our active cycles are much longer. We can travel up to 4 standard sleep cycles before needing to rest." The sergeant's exosuit remained quiet at this information, likely surprised. Muller took advantage of the quiet to pull his notepad out of his jacket and click his pen in preparation for writing. Before he could scribble anything down, however, Tavish pointed at the notepad and pen. "What are those?" "This is a writing implement. It leaves a trail of ink behind when I press it to this form of compressed plant matter." "You use something so primitive? Why not a standard data slate and stylus?" "Cultural tradition," Muller said, even though the real reason was because no one could spy on his notes if they were written down instead of stored on a data slate. "Now then, could you please explain to me what happened?" "Well, as I stated in the transmission, the suspect." "What?" "We have footage of him doing it. He's a criminal. To humans, someone is innocent until proven guilty by a panel of their peers." "What? But people can be biased. You don't use computer algorithms like the rest of the galaxy?" "No." "What a strange, backwards and barbaric culture." "Sergeant, your mic is still on." "I'm aware. I wasn't intending on keeping that comment private." Muller did have to respect the honesty of the Greslins. Even so, the person in question did what? Right. He was entering the station with I'm searching for the appropriate word, a potential terrorist recruiter. They were moving through a crowd when the suspect angered a squad of Phyllis Rangers. They activated their battle ball and began a ritual of insult. He then caught their battle ball, turned one of your people's songs, if you can call it that, and then apparently beat them at their own ritual. Taking great offense, they found him later and challenged him to combat in a civilian eating establishment. He then caused great damage to the establishment and the galactic soldiers. Muller wrote this down and seemed a little surprised by the information. So, he defended himself. Are they seeking damages he caused in the fight? What? Well, no. The government paid damages already. We're seeking him for being spotted with a known terrorist and assaulting a squad of galactic special forces. But they challenged him, and you said it was a potential terrorist. Well, he wasn't supposed to have fought back, and she's a terrorist. Just potentially a recruiter too, is what I meant. Muller slowly nodded as he kept writing. And his info? Tavish looked at the data slates spread across his desk before picking one him. From the dock listing, he was known as Vizgit Kuxnes Cargo Hauler. There was a pause as Muller looked back up. What? That's not a human name. It's not? Oh, hold on. Tavish put the data slate down and picked up another one. Oh, here it is. Sorry. He is known as Billy Bob Space Trucker. Billy Bob hadn't thought he'd be so lucky. Apparently, most bars kept 100% alcohol and would just water it way down with various other liquids, depending on what drink was wanted by what species. Not only did this make sure he'd have plenty to drink later, but it was perfect for the Molotov cocktails. Emily seemed less sure. A potent incendiary, clearly, but it'll just drop off people. Ah, that's what the sugar is for. He was dumping sugar into the bottles he'd filled with alcohol. The heat melts the sugar and it makes it sticky. Is that true? To be honest, I don't have a fucking clue. But I think I read it once, so I'm going to try it out. Even so, how do you plan on getting it to them? I'm going to throw it. There's no way. They're 75 yards away. Yeah, it's close to a throw from the outfield to home plate. I did that back in community college. I wasn't good enough to go pro, but if I'd been smart enough to get into an actual college, I'm sure I'd have made their team too. What? I don't understand. Never mind. I just need you to be a distraction. What? They'll kill me. I'm not as hardy as you. You can fly. Just swoop around above them and then get out of there after I throw the first bottle. But I'm a diplomat, not a soldier. I've only undergone basic espionage training. Well, I'm a pilot. I only underwent basic training for ground combat. He paused for a moment. Why is a diplomat trained in basic espionage? Isn't diplomacy filled with intrigue on your planet? No. Well, not anymore. Okay, good point. He collected an arm full of the bottles as she backed up from him. He stepped outside the bar as he heard Rock Lobster playing on the PA. That was likely confusing the shit out of the Xenos. He looked back at Emily as she stood behind him. He could tell she was nervous, so he set the bottles down and then set a hand on her shoulder. Look, Emily, you can do this. Those targeting computers take a few seconds to track me and I'm not flying. Just scare them and get out. It'll be fine. Promise. He watched the Space Eagle hesitate, then nod. She turned away from him. Wait, she turned back. Let the song end. She paused and waited until Rock Lobster finally ended. He nodded and she began running before jumping up and letting her wings snap out from the folds of her cloak, then took flight as he grinned. America? Fuck yeah! He whispered at the sight of the flying space bald eagle. She swooped down the street like hallway and turned back. She built up speed and rounded the corner as he heard the Borks cry out, then quickly scrolled down his implant as he lit the rag he'd stuffed into the top of the bottle. As he rounded the corner, the Borks were aiming up, trying to get a bead on Emily. He reached back and chucked the bottle as hard as he could towards the mech on the left, then grabbed the next bottle, tossing it before the first landed. Just as the bottle smashed into the mech and exploded in a ball of fire, the singing started. Burn, baby, burn! Burn, baby, burn! The mech on the right fired a stream of bolts at Emily, who cried out and swooped away past Billy Bob. The second bottle fell a bit short, coating the Borks in front of the mech. As they screamed, the first mech was stumbling. the ammo inside cooking off as it began to explode. He chucked the third bottle towards the center group as the Borks were in utter chaos. Then he turned looking for Emily. She had come to a stop down the street, red blood smeared along the ground behind her. He cursed and quickly ran to her. She was sprawled out on the ground, a nasty gash along her outer thigh. She was groaning as she clutched it, and Billy Bob frowned, but then quickly grabbed a bottle and ran to her. He smiled as he crouched next to her. "Hey, you did great. I nailed the fuckers. Don't worry about this. It's nothing serious." He pulled a small pack from his vest and pulled out the rag from the bottle he'd brought. He poured some of the alcohol on the gash as she cried out. Then he pulled out a small tube as he pulled the cap off and began to smear a clear gel along her wound. "Oh, good you have biomedical gel. I didn't think you would. It's just for militaries after all." "I don't. Sounds cool, though. This is industrial glue." She tensed. "What?" "Don't worry, perfectly safe, I think. It's safe for humans." "Billy Bob, I won't let you die." He wrapped the now glued, gashed up with a bandage from his pack, and then picked her up. He had no idea she'd be so light. Even considering the gravity, she felt incredibly easy to pick up. Then again, she could fly, so he shrugged. Carrying her back into the bar, he set her down within reach of more alcohol and some fruit drinks. Then he gave her one of his knives. "I'll be back," he said with a smile, patting her shoulder before he ran back outside. He picked up his shotgun and his bat before moving on. Taking another glance around the corner, the Borks were gone. Either they were all burned to a crisp in the flames or had run off. He wasn't sure, but he knew he didn't care. One mech had exploded. The other had opened the hatch and looked empty as the flames began to lap at its feet. He could hear sirens as the station's fire alarms began to go off. The Dragon's breath rounds he'd used earlier hadn't been enough to get it going, but the fire of 3 Molotovs seemed to draw attention. He began to run faster before jumping over one of the puddles of flame near the edge. Once he was past, he stepped up to the big security panel next to the door the final Borks had been guarding. Emily had made sure he still had access, and as he hit the right button and the door started to slide open, he smiled. "Just you and me now, clown." He hit the button on the elevator inside and looked around as it began to grind up towards his destination. Wait. What song did he want to play? He cursed at his lack of planning and began to scroll through his playlist. No, maybe, no, yes, perfect. The song began to play as the elevator neared the top. As he stepped out, the wide-open throne room command center he'd seen earlier had been transformed. Now he was standing in a maze-like set of corridors. He smiled then as began to walk, while Jim Morrison, the Lizard King, began to sing. "This is the end, beautiful friend." There were footsteps moving away from him as he walked through the corridors. His shotgun was slung at his side in easy reach as he held his bat over his shoulder, letting it drag across the walls. Every so often a gap would make the scraping pause before the quiet song was interrupted with a clunk. On he walked until at a junction a Bork jumped out at him with some sort of hand axe. Billy Bob quickly jumped back and swung his bat. Crack! A horn snapped off as its head jerked and it fell to the ground. Maybe dead, maybe not. Billy Bob stepped over the body and went down the side it had come from. He walked another few minutes and then found the rows of consoles he'd seen before. The space goblins had run off, it seemed. A few of them were dead near the far door, but most escaped, it seemed. He saw a Bork near a door at the back, raising his weapon at Billy Bob. Billy Bob was faster, snapping his handgun up and firing a round. It just grazed the creature, but with a .45 that counted. It spun around, slamming into the wall behind it and falling to the ground unconscious. Billy Bob stopped in front of the door as he heard Jim sing, and he came to a door. And he looked inside. Good idea, Jim. He opened the door then and pulled his shotgun up. There was the main throne room. The space clown was sitting on it, dead Borks around his feet. Billy Bob growled as he heard that awful voice once more.
"They failed me and my god, but I shall not. You will be a most amazing tribute. I shall be showered with praise."
He tilted his head up at that, raising all of his arms to the ceiling. Then lowering his arms, he looked to Billy Bob.
"Will you honor me by fighting hand to hand?"
Billy Bob looked around at the Bork corpses. They had slash marks around their throats and backs. Looking back up at the space clown, Billy Bob sneered. "Only if you get close enough." Raising his handgun, he fired, but the space clown sneered and shifted to the side. Billy Bob cursed as he realized why the thing had smelled like gas earlier. That fat-ass gut was filled with the stuff. It seemed to utilize some sort of release valves in its body to boost left and right as Billy Bob tried to nail the fucker. When his slide racked back, magazine empty, he quickly ejected it. But as the magazine fell and he tried to slam a new one home, the space clown dashed forward. Those four arms reaching up, the fingers having extended jagged claws.
Okay.
Billy Bob couldn't reload and jump to the side at the same time fast enough, and he cried out as he felt some cuts along his right arm as he moved aside. Rolling away, he jumped back up and fired off another set of rounds at the space clown. It was laughing maniacally as kept dodging his bullets. But this time, when Billy Bob had to eject the magazine and it rushed forward, he used one hand to grab his shotgun on the sling and fire it point blank from the hip. The space clown's three eyes bulged in surprise as the buckshot slammed into him. But he just flew backwards, bouncing around like a beach ball as Billy Bob cursed. Seems like the fucker had a better shield than the Borks. It howled out in annoyance as it finally stopped bouncing around the room. Laid out on its back, it kicked those fat feet in the air to roll over and hop back up. Billy Bob had reloaded and began to fire off another series of rounds. But he had to fire it one-handed as his right side was killing him, the pain from the cuts burning deep. When he ejected the round this time, though, he fumbled his gun and it began to fall from his hand. The space clown howled in glee and charged forward again. But as it swung out, a clawed hand, Billy Bob dove forward into it. He gasped as he felt those claws slash along his stomach and ribs. But more importantly, he'd pulled his knife free, jamming it into that fat fuck's gas sack. The space clown's eyes went wide as Billy Bob pulled the knife free. There was a loud hiss as it began to fly back. Billy Bob coughed at the rancid smell as the space clown seemed to deflate, flying through the air before landing at the base of the throne. It was skinny as a rail now, gasping as it tried to pull itself up. Billy Bob was clutching his side as he stepped closer. Jim Morrison nearing the end of his song in the background as the space clown gasped, holding up two hands. "Wubby, wait!" Then Billy Bob lifted his steel-toed boot high. "No," and brought it down with all the force he could possibly manage as a super-heavy gravity death weapon. And so ends another chapter in the adventures of Billy Bob's Space Trucker.